When I walked through my mother's front door that Thanksgiving morning, the house was silent, too silent. The turkey sat raw in the sink. The TV was still on from last night, and Grandma lay in her recliner, shivering as a fever burned through her paper-thin skin. On the fridge was a note in my sister's messy handwriting: Vegas trip, be back Monday. Grandma's fine. Don't call. They left her, just to enjoy some alone time. By the time they came home, I wasn't their quiet daughter anymore. My name is Rachel Dunn, and the icy grip of Maple Ridge in late November was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd missed. For 32 years, this town had been the backdrop of my life, a place of quiet streets, familiar faces, and the suffocating comfort of knowing nothing ever really changed. After 2 years of grinding out a life for myself in the city, the sight of the first, delicate snowflakes dusting the bare branches of the maple trees that lined Main Street felt like a welcome mat. It was a postcard from a simpler time, a promise of a Thanksgiving that might finally feel like the ones from my childhood, full of warmth. The scent of roasting turkey, and the sound of my family's laughter filling the small house I grew up in. The 4-hour drive had been a necessary decompression, a buffer between the sharp edges of my corporate law career and the softer, more complicated world of home. I'd let myself believe, just for a morning, that this visit would be different, that this time I would feel seen. The house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the same pale blue siding, the same slightly crooked mailbox, a wreath, already looking tired and wind-beaten, hung on the front door. I pulled into the driveway, my tires crunching on the thin layer of snow, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and profound, broken only by the distant whine of a leaf blower. I expected to see lights on, to smell the rich, savory aroma of the turkey that should have been in the oven for hours. Instead, there was nothing, just a cold, still tableau, a flicker of unease, small but persistent, pricked at the edges of my holiday cheer. My mother's front door was unlocked. It wasn't entirely unusual. This was Maple Ridge. After all, but on a holiday morning, it felt wrong. I pushed it open and stepped inside, calling out, "Hello, Mom Diane?" The only answer was the droning, relentlessly cheerful voice of a presenter on a shopping channel. The air inside was colder than it was outside, a damp, stagnant chill that clung to the furniture and seemed to seep into my bones. The living room was cast in the flickering blue light of the oversized television. On screen, a woman with impossibly white teeth was demonstrating a vegetable slicer that could, apparently, change your life. The room was empty. A half-empty mug of what looked like old coffee sat on the end table, a faint, gray film on its surface. The whole house felt paused, like a scene abandoned mid-act. A faint, acrid smell hung in the air, a ghost of something burnt. I followed it to the kitchen. There, sitting in the sterile basin of the stainless steel sink, was the Thanksgiving turkey. It was still in its plastic wrapping, pale and clammy, a 20-pound monument to forgotten plans. A small saucepan sat on the stove, a blackened residue clinging to its bottom. That was the source of the smell. Someone had started something heating milk, maybe, and walked away. The scene was one of pure neglect, a holiday meal that had died before it ever began. My heart started to beat a little faster. Where were they? My sister, Diane, her husband, Mark, my mother. They were supposed to be here, a family trip, maybe, a last-minute emergency, but they would have called. They would have locked the door. Then I saw her. Grandma Evelyn was in her favorite recliner in the corner of the living room, the one with the worn floral pattern. She was so still, so curled into herself, that I hadn't noticed her at first. She was enveloped in the gloom, away from the television's artificial light. She wasn't watching it. Her eyes were closed, her face turned toward the cushions. A thin afghan, one she'd knitted decades ago, was pooled around her waist, offering little comfort. "Grandma," I whispered, moving closer. Her breathing was shallow, a faint, fluttering sound. I reached out and touched her forehead, and a jolt of pure, undiluted panic shot through me. Her skin was scorching hot, yet clammy with a film of sweat that beaded on her brow and dampened her thin, white hair. She was shivering, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that shook her frail, 86-year-old frame. Her skin, normally as soft and cool as old parchment, felt like it was radiating heat, a dry, dangerous fire from within. "Grandma, can you hear me? It's Rachel." Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A low moan escaped her lips, a sound of such profound misery that it physically hurt to hear. My legal training, the part of my brain that was all logic and procedure, screamed at me to be methodical. Find a thermometer, check her vitals, assess the situation. I scrambled through the bathroom cabinets, my hands shaking as I knocked over old bottles of prescription pills and expired ointments. I finally found a digital thermometer tucked behind a stack of hand towels. Back in the living room, I gently slipped it under her tongue. She didn't stir. The seconds it took to get a reading stretched into an eternity, the silence of the house pressing in on me, amplifying the frantic thumping of my own heart. The small device beeped. I pulled it out, my blood running cold as I read the display, 102.3 degrees F. A fever that high in someone her age was a medical emergency. I looked around wildly, my gaze sweeping the room for any sign of care. There was no glass of water on the table beside her, no bottle of Tylenol or aspirin, no extra blankets. She was just left here, abandoned in a cold room with a raging fever. My eyes landed on a piece of paper stuck to the refrigerator with a cheap, smiling sun magnet. It was a note, scrawled in my sister Diane's loopy, overly enthusiastic handwriting, the kind of handwriting she used for birthday cards and cheerful, passive-aggressive reminders. My legs felt unsteady as I walked over to read it. The words were simple, careless, and utterly devastating. "Vegas trip be back Monday. Grandma's fine. Don't call." It was signed with a flourished Diane and Mark. The first emotion wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt. It was a profound, hollow shock, a numbness that started in my chest and spread through my limbs until I felt like I was encased in ice. Vegas. They had gone to Las Vegas. They had looked at our grandmother, sick and vulnerable, and decided that slot machines and buffet dinners were more important. They hadn't just forgotten her. They had made a conscious choice to leave her behind. The phrase "grandma's fine" was a lie of such breathtaking cruelty that I couldn't fully process it. It wasn't a mistake. It was a dismissal. They had erased her needs to satisfy their own wants. My fingers, moving on their own accord, pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb swiped to Instagram, a sick, morbid curiosity guiding the motion, and there they were. The first picture was a selfie of Diane and Mark, clinking oversized novelty cocktails in front of a glittering casino facade. Diane's smile was wide, her teeth blindingly white. Mark had his arms slung around her, a goofy, carefree grin on his face. The caption was a nauseating blend of self-congratulation and faux gratitude. A much-needed getaway. So important to take time for yourselves. Feeling blessed. Vegas, baby freedom. Time alone. Time. Freedom time. The hashtag burned itself into my brain. This was their freedom, leaving an 86-year-old woman with a 102-degree fever alone in a cold house for 4 days. I scrolled through the stories. There was a video of a fountain show, a picture of a plate of oysters, another selfie of them laughing hysterically at a comedy club. Each image was a fresh stab of betrayal, a digital monument to their callousness. They weren't just in Vegas. They were broadcasting their dereliction of duty to the world, framing it as a well-deserved vacation. The ice inside me began to crack, and something hot and sharp took its place. The numbness receded, replaced by a chilling, crystalline clarity. My hands were perfectly steady now. The part of me that had felt lost and hurt just moments before was gone, replaced by the lawyer, the fixer, the one who cleans up the messes. I dialed 911. My voice was calm, clipped, and professional as I spoke to the dispatcher. "I need an ambulance at 142 Oak Street. I have an 86-year-old female, unresponsive, with a temperature of 102.3. She appears dehydrated and has been left unattended. I gave the details with cold precision, leaving out the part about my family. The note, the Vegas pictures. The facts were all that mattered. The facts were damning enough. After I hung up, I found the thickest quilt I could in the linen closet and gently draped it over my grandmother. Her shivering seemed to subside slightly under the weight. I knelt by the side of her recliner, the garish light of the shopping channel casting long, distorted shadows on the wall behind us. The ambulance would be here in minutes. The quiet of the house was no longer empty. It was heavy with unspoken things, with years of casual neglect that had finally culminated in this one unforgivable act. As I waited, a faint pressure graced my hand. I looked down. Grandma Evelyn's eyes were open, just barely. They were cloudy with fever, but they were focused on me. Her fingers, impossibly fragile, tightened around mine with a strength I wouldn't have thought she possessed. Her voice was a dry, rasping whisper, each word an effort. "You're the only one," she breathed, "the only one who remembered to come back." A wave of grief and rage washed over me, so powerful it threatened to break the calm facade I had constructed. All these years, I had been the odd one out, the career-obsessed daughter who lived too far away. Diane was the golden child, the one who stayed close, the one who was supposed to be taking care of things. But in the end, I was the one kneeling on this cold floor, holding this frail hand. I was the only one here. I leaned in close, my lips almost touching her ear, the heat from her fever warming my cheek. I squeezed her hand back, a silent promise passing between us. The wail of a siren grew in the distance, a sound of rescue, but also a sound of reckoning. "It's okay now." "Grandma," I whispered, my voice low and steady, imbued with a conviction that felt as solid and real as the floor beneath my knees. "They'll pay for this." The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance painted the living room walls in frantic, silent strokes, washing over the pale face of the woman on the shopping channel, who was now, with undiminished enthusiasm, trying to sell a set of non-stick pans. The paramedics were a whirlwind of calm, professional efficiency. They moved with a purpose that felt alien in this house of neglect, their voices low and steady as they took Grandma Evelyn's vitals, strapped an oxygen mask over her face, and skillfully transferred her from the recliner to a gurney. I stood back, a useless spectator in the corner of a life I was supposed to be a part of, answering their clipped questions with the same detached precision I used in legal depositions. "No, I don't know how long she's been like this. No, I don't know her primary care physician's name. No, I am not her legal guardian." Each answer was a small, sharp admission of my own distance, my own failure to see how bad things had become. As they wheeled her out into the cold November air, the reality of the family hierarchy settled over me like a shroud. In the eyes of the world, and certainly in the eyes of my own family, I was not the person to call. I was the secondary character, the supporting cast member who lived out of state, the real star of our family. The one whose name was on all the official documents was my sister, Diane. Diane was, and always had been, the golden daughter. Her life was a meticulously crafted narrative of suburban perfection. She had married her high school sweetheart, Mark, a man whose personality was as beige as his collection of polo shirts. They had the big house in the nice part of Maple Ridge, the one with the professionally landscaped yard and the 3-car garage. They had 3 beautiful, photogenic children who were always dressed in coordinating, tastefully muted colors, and most importantly, Diane had the Instagram feed to prove it. Her life wasn't lived. It was curated. Each post was a carefully selected frame in the feature film of her own perfection family apple picking in the fall. A candid shot of Mark reading to the kids by a roaring fire. A sun-drenched photo from their annual trip to the Outer Banks. It was a life built on aesthetics, a fortress of manufactured happiness designed to be envied. And then there was me. I was the other one, the strange daughter, the one who had fled Maple Ridge for law school and never really looked back. I had a demanding job at a corporate firm in the city, An apartment that was more of a place to sleep than a home, and a social life that was a distant third priority after my career and my student loan payments. To my family. My ambition was a pathology. My independence a character flaw. I didn't know how to enjoy life. That was the official verdict. Delivered by my mother one Christmas a few years ago. I'd been passionately explaining a complex pro bono case I'd taken on, helping a small community fight a zoning change. My mother had listened with a patient, tired smile before sighing, that long-suffering sound she reserved for my life choices. Diane knows how to live. Rachel, she'd said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a judge's gavel. You only know how to work. The implication was clear. Diane's life, the PTA meetings, the bake sales, the endless cycle of domestic obligations was living. My life, the 16-hour workdays, the intellectual challenges, the financial independence I had fought tooth and nail for was a sad, empty substitute. They saw my choices not as a different path, but as a lesser one. Nowhere was this difference more stark than when our father was dying. The cancer had been aggressive and merciless, and the bills had piled up like autumn leaves, threatening to bury my mother in a mountain of debt. From my office 200 miles away, I spent hours on the phone with the hospital's billing department, negotiating payment plans, and I set up an automatic wire transfer from my savings account that covered the bulk of the expenses. I never mentioned it. It was simply what needed to be done. A week after I started the payments, my mother sent me a photo. It was of a floral arrangement so large it blocked the window in my father's hospital room, a riot of white lilies, Dad's least favorite flower, their funereal scent probably suffocating him. The card, I later learned, was in Diane's looping script. Thinking of you every second, it read, she and Mark had sent a performance. I had sent a lifeline. She'd even had the audacity to frame my contribution as a weakness. I'd made the mistake of trying to talk to her about it once, about the pressure and the financial strain. You just do things like that. She'd sniffed over the phone, the sound of one of her children whining in the background, to make up for the guilt of never being here. The accusation had stung, not because it contained a kernel of truth, but because it was a masterful piece of projection. Diane couldn't comprehend doing something out of sheer, unglamorous responsibility. In her world, every action had to have an emotional, preferably dramatic, motive. She couldn't imagine that I wasn't acting out of guilt. I was just acting like a grown-up. It was a concept that seemed to have eluded her. The only person who never seemed to subscribe to the family's official narrative was Grandma Evelyn. She was the one who had quietly slipped me $100 bill when I left for college, whispering, "Don't let them tell you who you are." Every year on my birthday, without fail, a card would arrive. Not a generic Hallmark sentiment, but a real, handwritten letter in her elegant, slightly shaky cursive, filled with questions about my work and my life. She asked about the cases I was working on, remembered the names of my colleagues. She was the only one who saw the person behind the profession, the only one who seemed to understand that my life wasn't a consolation prize. Last year, for her 85th birthday, I'd sent her a high-end digital photo frame, preloaded with hundreds of pictures from my phone sunsets from my apartment window, a silly selfie with my cat, a shot of a celebratory dinner after winning a big case. It was my way of letting her into the world they all dismissed. I got a tearful, grateful voicemail from her a few days later. When I spoke to Diane the following week, her tone was laced with condescension. "That was a nice gesture, I guess," she'd said, a little impersonal, sending something from a website. "But I'm sure she appreciated it. You just do things like that to look better, don't you?" To look better, as if my relationship with our grandmother was some kind of competition, as if love and care were assets to be leveraged in the endless, silent war for familial approval. Diane saw everything through the lens of her own curated reality. A gift wasn't a gift. It was content. An act of kindness wasn't genuine unless it could be photographed and hashtagged. And now, my grandmother was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life because of their grotesque selfishness, while Diane was probably sipping champagne by a pool in Las Vegas, complaining about the quality of the room service. The contrast was so obscene, so fundamentally wrong that it felt like a tear in the fabric of the universe. In the cold, sterile waiting room of the Maple Ridge General Hospital, surrounded by the murmur of other families and the antiseptic smell of fear, something inside me shifted. The shock and the grief were still there, but they were being consumed by something else, something cold and hard and sharp. It was the same feeling I got when I was facing a particularly smug opposing counsel, the one who underestimated me, who saw a woman instead of a lawyer. It was a feeling of profound, focused rage. They had spent my entire life casting me in a role I never auditioned for, the cold one, the distant one, the one who didn't care. They had made me invisible, a ghost in the family machine, a silent, unacknowledged ATM that paid the bills and stayed out of the way, an afterthought. And as I sat there, under the merciless fluorescent hum of the emergency room, an idea began to form. It was not a product of emotion, but of pure, crystalline logic. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet competence for weakness, my distance for indifference. They had written me out of their perfect family story. Fine. If they saw me as invisible, then I would use that invisibility. An invisible force can still move things. An invisible hand can still tip the scales of justice. They had built their entire world on a foundation of appearances, on the carefully constructed facade of the perfect family. I would burn it to the ground, and I would use their own perfectly curated, beautifully photographed lives as the kindling. I would make this whole town, the one that adored them, finally see who Diane and Mark Thompson really were. The emergency room was a universe of managed chaos, lit by the unforgiving glare of fluorescent panels that hummed with a low, incessant buzz. Every surface was hard. Every smell was sterile. The air tasted of antiseptic and anxiety. Nurses moved with a brisk, gliding efficiency, their voices calm but firm, a stark contrast to the raw, unfiltered human suffering that surrounded me. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my spine rigid, and watched as they worked on my grandmother in a curtained-off bay. The rhythmic beep of a heart monitor was a fragile metronome counting out the seconds of her life. The sounds were sharp, distinct, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the crisp tear of a sanitized wipe package, the low murmur of a doctor giving orders. Each sound pierced the fog of my shock, grounding me in the grim reality of the moment. An hour later, which felt like a lifetime, a doctor with exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes pulled back the curtain. He looked at me, then at the chart in his hands, then back at me. "Rachel Dunn." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Your grandmother is stable for now. We've admitted her. She's severely dehydrated, and her fever is the result of a fairly advanced case of bacterial pneumonia. The chest X-ray confirms it. From the looks of it, she's been developing this for a few days. The exposure to cold in the house certainly didn't help. It likely accelerated things." He paused, his gaze sharpening slightly. "We're starting her on a course of strong intravenous antibiotics and fluids. She's a fighter. But at her age, something like this, it's serious." Pneumonia, dehydration, exposure to cold. Each word was a clinical, sanitized confirmation of what I already knew. This wasn't a tragic accident. It was a direct result of neglect. The doctor's professional language was a thin veil over a brutal accusation. As the orderlies prepared to move Grandma to the intensive care unit, a nurse with a clipboard and a weary expression approached me. She was all business, her questions delivered in a rapid-fire monotone. "I need to get some information for the admission paperwork," she began, not making eye contact. "Date of birth, insurance information, primary care physician." She rattled off the list. I answered what I could, my own ignorance a fresh source of shame. Then came the question that stopped me cold. "And who is her legal guardian? We need consent for treatment. And I don't see your name on her emergency contact file." The question hung in the air, an invisible barrier between me and the ability to help. "I'm her granddaughter," I said, my voice strained. The nurse finally looked up from her clipboard, her eyes scanning my face with a practiced neutrality. "I understand that, ma'am. But are you her legal power of attorney for healthcare? No, I admitted. I'm not. Then I'll need to speak with the person who is. She flipped a page on her clipboard. According to our records, the primary decision maker listed is her eldest daughter, a Diane Thompson. The name, spoken in this sterile, bureaucratic context, was like a lit match on a trail of gasoline. A hot, violent rage surged in my chest, so intense it made my vision swim for a second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell this woman about the Instagram photos, the abandoned turkey, the hashtag freedom time. I wanted to shake her and make her understand the monstrous irony of the situation. But I didn't. The lawyer in my brain took over, clamping down on the emotion with icy control. A scene would get me nowhere. A scene would only make me look unstable, emotional, weak. Instead, I met the nurse's gaze, letting my own run cold. I kept my voice perfectly level, each word a chip of ice. The eldest daughter, I said slowly, distinctly, is in Vegas. The nurse's professional mask flickered. Just for a second, I saw a flash of something else in her eyes, surprise, pity, maybe even disgust. Then it was gone, replaced by the weary resignation of someone who had seen every possible flavor of human fallibility. I see, she said, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. Well, the doctor has already authorized emergency admission and treatment under implied consent, given her condition, but we will need to get in touch with Mrs. Thompson as soon as possible. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the wake of her words, powerless, a non-entity, a legal stranger to the woman whose hand I had held just an hour before. That was when the transformation inside me was complete. The grief and the shock were still there, simmering deep beneath the surface, but they were no longer in control. My mind was now a cold, clean, well-lit space. All emotion had been converted into fuel. My rage was no longer a fire. It was an engine, humming with a quiet, terrifying purpose. I needed to go back to the house to get Grandma's purse, her insurance cards. The nurse's request was the perfect excuse. Driving back through the quiet, snow-dusted streets of Maple Ridge, I felt like a different person from the one who had arrived that morning, full of naive holiday hope. I was an operative now. I was on a mission. I entered the silent house not as a grieving granddaughter, but as a prosecutor entering a crime scene. The air was still cold, the TV still blaring its relentless sales pitch to an empty room. I pulled out my phone. The screen's light felt like a spotlight in the gloom. My first photograph was of the note on the fridge. I took it from multiple angles, ensuring the messy, cheerful handwriting was perfectly clear. I took a close-up of the smiling sun magnet, a grotesque counterpoint to the message it held. Next, the kitchen. I photographed the raw turkey in the sink, its pale, goose-pimpled skin a symbol of the abandoned feast. I photographed the burnt pan on the stove. In the living room, I documented the scene of the crime, the empty recliner, the thin, useless Afghan pooled on the floor where it had fallen. I took a wider shot showing the recliner's isolation in the cold. Dark corner of the room. Then, I switched to video. I held the phone steady, panning slowly, deliberately. I recorded the silence, the stale air, the droning television. I let the camera linger on the half-empty coffee mug, the dust on the end tables. I created a silent, 2-minute film titled Neglect. Each photo, each second of video, was an exhibit. Exhibit A. The note. Exhibit B. The abandoned turkey. Exhibit C. The scene of suffering. I was no longer thinking like a daughter. I was thinking like a litigator. I was building my case. Back in my car, before I even started the engine, I opened my laptop. The hospital could wait. Justice couldn't. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicks echoing in the silent car. I drafted an email. The recipient was the public intake address for the Maple Ridge County Adult Protective Services. The subject line was stark urgent report, suspected elder neglect and abandonment. The body of the email was concise, factual, and devoid of emotion. I stated my name and relationship to the victim. I detailed the exact condition in which I had found Evelyn Dunn. including her body temperature and her state of unresponsiveness. I described the condition of the house cold, unlocked, with an uncooked holiday meal abandoned in the sink. I transcribed the note, word for word. I stated that the legal guardian, Diane Thompson, was, by her own written admission, on a non-essential trip to Las Vegas, Nevada, and had left her incapacitated mother without any provision for care. I attached the photos and the video file. I hit send. A strange calm settled over me. This was no longer just about my fierce, protective love for my grandmother. That love was the catalyst, the spark. But the fire now was something different. It was the cold, clarifying chill of pure calculation. My personal pain had been sublimated into a professional objective. My sister and her husband hadn't just broken my heart. They had broken the law. They had committed a crime, not just against a helpless old woman, but against the basic tenets of human decency. And I knew the law. I knew the statutes. I knew the precise language of Title 22, the sections on neglect, endangerment, and a caregiver's duty of care. They had built their lives on a foundation of appearances, but I built my life on a foundation of facts, evidence, and the unyielding power of the legal system. They had left a trail of evidence, and I knew exactly how to make them face the consequences of it. This wasn't going to be a messy, emotional family feud. It was going to be a quiet, methodical, and legally irrefutable dismantling of their entire world. The ICU was a world stripped of all pretense. There were no soft colors, no polite fictions, only the raw, mechanical reality of life hanging by a thread. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the low, rhythmic sigh of the ventilator that was breathing for my grandmother. I sat in a stiff, unforgiving visitor's chair, the fluorescent lights overhead casting a sterile pallor on everything, and watched the steady rise and fall of her chest. Each machine-driven breath was a testament to her fragility and a monument to their betrayal. In this place, the only thing that mattered was the truth, displayed in stark, unforgiving numbers on the monitors beside her bed. But in the world my sister inhabited, the truth was a flexible commodity. While I was tracking Grandma's oxygen saturation levels, Diane was curating a different set of metrics: likes, comments, and shares. My phone, a portal to that other, falser universe, became a source of morbid fascination, a direct feed from the enemy camp. It was a study in cognitive dissonance. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, Diane's social media performance continued, unabated and utterly shameless. She posted a picture of her and Mark, their faces glowing in the neon-drenched Las Vegas twilight, holding up a yard-long, luridly colored frozen drink. The caption read, "Making memories so important to recharge the batteries. Grateful for this break. A happy family needs happy parents." An hour later, a story, a short, shaky video of a craps table, the roar of the crowd, the clatter of dice. Text was overlaid in a cheerful, bubbly font. "Feeling lucky tonight." Then came the pièce de résistance, a professionally shot photo, likely taken by a casino photographer, of Diane and Mark dressed for a night out. Diane was in a sequined dress that caught the light, her smile a dazzling, predatory slash of red lipstick. Mark stood beside her in a slightly too tight blazer, looking pleased with his prize. The caption was a masterpiece of self-serving hypocrisy. "It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, especially when you're a caregiver," she wrote, as if she were a battle-weary Florence Nightingale. "But you have to remember to take time for yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. Family deserves rest too. So grateful for this alone time to reconnect." Self-care marriage. Goals, Vegas nights. I saved every image, every story. I took screenshots of the captions, the timestamps, the location tags. Each post was another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. The truly sickening part was the response. Maple Ridge's digital town square was lapping it up. The comments section was a chorus of fawning approval. "You two look amazing. So well-deserved from a woman in her book club." "So true. Diane, you give so much to everyone. It's your time to shine from a neighbor down the street." "Have a blast. You guys are the best parents from another PTA mom." They saw the shimmering facade and mistook it for a real home. They read the carefully crafted words and believed them to be a genuine reflection of a life well lived. I scrolled through the sea of heart emojis and thumbs up, a bitter, acidic taste rising in my throat. They had no idea. They had no idea that while they were applauding her well-deserved break, the matriarch of her family was lying in a glass-walled room, tethered to life by a tangle of tubes and wires. I imagined their faces, their shock, their dawning horror. If I were to post a picture of Grandma Evelyn in her current state right in the comments, but that wasn't the way. Raw emotion was messy. My approach had to be clean, sharp, and undeniable. My fingers hovered over the keyboard of my phone. The rage that had been a cold. Hard knot in my stomach began to burn. I opened my messaging app and found her name. The last text from her, months ago, was a link to a recipe for a gluten-free casserole. I typed, my thumbs moving with cold precision. "Grandma's in the ICU at Maple Ridge General. She has severe pneumonia. You left her alone with a 102-degree fever." I sent it. There was no greeting, no preamble, just the cold, hard facts. I imagined the message arriving, a tiny digital bomb detonating in the middle of her glitter-dusted fantasy. I watched the screen, waiting for the 3 little dots that would signal her reply. They appeared, vanished, then appeared again. She was composing, deleting, carefully crafting her response. Finally, it came through. "You always exaggerate. Rachel, she probably just has a little cold. Stop being so dramatic and don't ruin my weekend. We'll check on her when we get back on Monday." Don't ruin my weekend. The sheer, unadulterated selfishness of that sentence took my breath away. It was a perfect distillation of her entire being, her comfort, her pleasure. Her meticulously planned alone time was the center of the universe, and any intrusion, even the potential death of her own grandmother, was an annoyance to be swatted away. The rage inside me cooled, hardening into something that felt like diamond. This wasn't a sister. This was an adversary. I typed my reply. It was short, and it was a promise. "Enjoy Vegas. The photos will look great in the report." I didn't wait for her to answer. I put the phone on silent and slipped it back into my pocket. The time for direct communication was over. Now, it was time to change the narrative. That evening, after a long, whispered conversation with a sleeping, unresponsive grandmother, I went back to my mother's empty, silent house. It felt less like a home now, and more like a piece of evidence. I made myself a cup of tea in a clean mug and sat down at the kitchen table. The one where Diane and I used to do our homework as children. I opened my laptop. I bypassed Facebook and Instagram. They were Diane's territory, curated and controlled. I needed a different venue, a more authentic one. I went to the Maple Ridge Community Forum, a clunky, outdated website where locals posted about lost pets, complained about potholes, and recommended plumbers. It was the digital soul of the town, unvarnished and unfiltered. I created a new, anonymous account. The username I chose was Maple Ridge Watcher. I started a new thread. The title was a simple, declarative statement, designed to be both shocking and informative. Elderly woman left alone on Thanksgiving while her family partied in Vegas. For the body of the post, I kept it brief and factual, mimicking the tone of a concerned neighbor. I'm posting this anonymously because I don't want to cause trouble for anyone, but I feel like our community needs to know what's happening. I wrote, "A beloved elderly woman in our town was left completely alone today, on Thanksgiving, in a cold house, while her immediate family, who are her primary caregivers, went on vacation to Las Vegas. She was found this morning with a very high fever and has been hospitalized in a serious condition. Her family's social media is full of pictures of them having a great time, while she is fighting for her life. This feels so wrong. What has happened to our town's values?" The text was the hook, but the evidence was the key. I wasn't going to post the note, or the pictures from the hospital. That was for the official report. For the court of public opinion, I needed something more evocative, more haunting. I went into the living room and took a single photograph. I framed the shot carefully. In the foreground was the small, empty dining table, set for a meal that would never happen. In the background, just visible in the gloom, was Grandma's empty recliner, and placed neatly on the floor beneath it, as if waiting for her to return, were her worn, comfortable slippers. The image was devastating in its quietness. It wasn't a picture of a crime. It was a portrait of absence, of a life forgotten. It was an accusation that didn't need to raise its voice. I uploaded the photo to the forum thread and clicked Submit Post. For a moment, nothing happened. My post sat there, the newest entry on a page of mundane local concerns. I closed my laptop and drank my tea, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Had I miscalculated? Was this a town that would simply scroll past, uninterested in the quiet tragedies of its neighbors? My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the forum. The first comment had appeared. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the laptop. A user named CarolG72 had written, "This is horrifying. Does anyone know who this could be?" Then another, "Bob's Hardware, disgusting, praying for this poor woman." And then, the one I was waiting for, a user named Church Lady Fran. "Wait a minute, the slippers. That looks like Evelyn Dunn's recliner. I'd recognize that floral pattern anywhere. Isn't her granddaughter Diane Thompson as real estate agent?" The match had been struck. I watched in real time as the fire caught. Within an hour, the thread had over 100 comments. Within 2, it was the only thing anyone in Maple Ridge was talking about. My anonymous post had become a digital wildfire, and Diane's perfect world was about to be engulfed in the flames. From the quiet, sterile bubble of the ICU, I watched the town of Maple Ridge ignite. It was like observing a chemical reaction from behind blast-proof glass. I had introduced a single, unstable element into a closed system, and now all I had to do was watch the chain reaction unfold. The first 10 minutes after I posted on the Maple Ridge Community Forum were a slow burn. The initial comments were expressions of generalized shock and anonymous sympathy, but then Church Lady Fran dropped the first spark into the tinderbox with her mention of Evelyn Dunn's recliner. A moment later, the accelerant was added. A user named HockeyDad88 replied directly to Fran. "If that's Mrs. Dunn, then isn't her granddaughter Diane Thompson, the real estate agent?" Wait a second. A new comment from him appeared seconds later. "Holy cow, I just checked her Facebook. She's been posting pictures from Las Vegas all day, with her husband." That was it. That was the moment the firestorm began. The forum thread exploded. It was no longer a place of speculation. It was a hub of real-time, crowdsourced investigation. People were toggling between the forum and Diane's social media profiles, posting their findings with a kind of breathless, horrified glee. She just posted a picture of a steak dinner an hour ago. An hour ago. While her grandma was probably lying on the floor. Look at the comments on her Vegas pics. All of us telling her she deserves a break. I feel sick. I'm deleting my comment right now. I saw Mark Thompson at the gas station yesterday morning. He said they were getting away from it all for a few days. He didn't mention his mother-in-law was sick. The digital world has a way of collapsing time and space, an act of private negligence, committed in a quiet house on a cul-de-sac, was now being tried in a public court of hundreds, with a jury that was angry, engaged, and armed with screenshots. I refreshed the page, and the comment count jumped from 150 to 250. The story was moving at the speed of outrage. I switched over to Diane's Instagram page. It was a fascinating, real-time sociological experiment. The number of likes on her latest post, the sequin dress, the dazzling smile, was actually going down. 452. I refreshed. 441. Refreshed again. 420. People weren't just scrolling past. They were actively retracting their approval. It was the digital equivalent of turning your back on someone in the town square. The fawning comments were being buried under an avalanche of new ones, these ones dripping with passive-aggressive venom. "Hope you're having a great time. Diane. Just heard about your grandmother. So worried. Is she okay? That's a beautiful dress. I'm sure your grandma would love it. Praying for her speedy recovery. Vegas fun I saw on the community forum that poor Evelyn is in the hospital. Must have happened so suddenly after you left. The hypocrisy was being mirrored back at her, polished to a mirror sheen. They were using her own language of feigned concern and public performance against her. It was brutal, and it was beautiful. By morning, the digital wildfire had jumped to the mainstream. The local online newspaper, the Maple Ridge Chronicle, which usually reported on high school football games and town council meetings, had a new banner headline on its homepage. It was a single, damning question. Thanksgiving abandonment in Maple Ridge. Local family's Vegas trip coincides with elderly matriarch's hospitalization. The article was carefully worded, avoiding any direct accusations. It quoted my anonymous forum post extensively. It mentioned that a beloved local grandmother, Evelyn D., was in serious condition at Maple Ridge General. It then noted, with journalistic precision, that her primary caregiver and granddaughter, prominent local real estate agent Diane Thompson, had been documenting a holiday vacation in Las Vegas on social media during the same time frame. It ended with a chillingly neutral sentence. The Chronicle reached out to Mrs. Thompson for comment, but has not yet received a response. The article was a digital grenade, and its shrapnel was already hitting its intended targets. My mother called, her voice a frantic, tearful whisper. "Rachel, what is going on? People are texting me. This article. Is it true? Is Evelyn in the hospital?" I told her the unvarnished truth, my voice flat and emotionless. She started to cry, a torrent of excuses and justifications already forming on her lips. I didn't have the energy for it. "I have to go." "Mom, the doctor is here." I hung up. My next move was surgical. I knew Diane's career was the centerpiece of her identity. Her image as a wholesome, trustworthy, community-oriented family woman was not just her personality, it was her brand. She worked for the top real estate firm in town, Thompson and Grace Realty. For the past month, their big marketing push had been the Homes with Heart campaign. Billboards all over town featured a smiling, beatific photo of Diane, holding a sold sign in front of a charming colonial. The tagline was printed in a warm, inviting font. "We don't just sell houses, we build communities, one heart at a time." The irony was so thick I could taste it. I copied the link to the Maple Ridge Chronicle article. I opened a new, anonymous email account. I found the general email address for the realty firm's public relations and marketing department. The subject line I wrote was simple: regarding your Homes with Heart campaign. The body of the email was even simpler. To whom it may concern. You may find this local news story of public interest to be relevant to your company's current marketing initiatives and brand identity. Sincerely, a concerned member of the community. I attached the link and hit send. For the rest of the day, I sat by Grandma's bedside, listening to the steady beep of the machines, a sound I had come to associate with progress. She was still unconscious, but her fever had broken, and the doctor said the antibiotics were working. In between his visits, I would periodically check the Thompson and Grace Realty website. At 4:15 p.m., it happened. I refreshed the homepage, and she was gone. The smiling, wholesome banner image of Diane had been replaced by a generic photo of a leafy suburban street. I clicked on the Our Agents page. Her professional headshot and glowing biography, which had been at the top of the page, had vanished. She hadn't just been demoted. She had been digitally erased. They had cut her loose before she could poison the brand. It was a swift, brutal, and entirely predictable act of corporate self-preservation. I felt a grim, quiet satisfaction. This was a consequence she would understand. This wasn't about feelings or family dynamics. It was about money and reputation. It was a language she spoke fluently. At 4:30 p.m., my phone rang. The screen lit up with her name. Diane. I let it ring 3 times, then answered, putting it on speaker and holding it a few inches from my ear. I didn't say a word. The sound that came through the speaker was not a voice. It was a raw, ragged shriek of pure, undiluted rage. Rachel. I waited. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury and panic. "My boss just called me, the website, the newspaper. People are calling me a monster. You did this. You're trying to destroy my life." I listened to her rant, to the torrent of accusations, the self-pity, the complete and utter absence of any concern for anyone but herself. There was no, "How is Grandma no? Is she okay?" It was all about her reputation, her career, her perfect, curated world, now in flames. When she finally paused, gasping for breath, the silence in the hospital room felt vast and profound, broken only by the steady, life-affirming beep of the heart monitor. I finally spoke, my voice as calm and quiet as the eye of the storm she was in. "I didn't do anything." "Diane." "Liar," she shrieked. "You've always been jealous of me. You couldn't stand that I was happy, that I had a family, so you decided to tear it all down." "No," I said, and the cold clarity in my own voice surprised even me. "You did that all by yourself. You're the one who left an 86-year-old woman with a fever to go party in Vegas. You're the one who wrote the note. You're the one who posted the pictures. All I did was turn on the light. You built a life that couldn't survive it." A choked, sputtering sound came from the other end of the line. She was speechless. "Enjoy your flight home," I said, and I hung up. The day after I hung up on Diane, the official response came. It arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, professional phone call. The caller ID showed a blocked number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was calm, measured, and bore the unmistakable weight of bureaucratic authority. "Am I speaking with Rachel Dunn?" "This is she." "Ms. Dunn, my name is Maria Alvarez. I'm a case manager with the Maple Ridge County Adult Protective Services. We received your report yesterday regarding the welfare of your grandmother, Evelyn Dunn. I want to thank you for reaching out. We have opened a formal investigation into a potential case of elder neglect." A formal investigation. The words were a quiet validation, the first official gear turning in the complex machine of the justice system. The anonymous forum post had been a tool of social pressure, but this was different. This was the law. "I'm glad to hear that," I said, my voice as level as hers. "What do you need from me?" "We'd like to schedule a time to take your formal statement. I'd also like to collect any and all evidence you have pertaining to the situation. Your initial email was very thorough, but a formal submission is required." "Of course," I said. "I'm at the hospital, but I have my laptop with me. I've already prepared a file. Where can I send it?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "You've already prepared a file?" "Yes," I said. "I'm a lawyer. I thought it would be best to have everything organized." The slight shift in Ms. Alvarez's tone was palpable. The dynamic had changed. I was no longer just a concerned, emotional granddaughter. I was a professional colleague, someone who understood procedure. "That would be extremely helpful. Ms. Dunn, I'll give you my direct, secure email address." After the call, I went to the hospital's small, quiet family lounge. I opened my laptop and pulled up the file I had spent the previous night meticulously compiling. It was organized like a preliminary case brief, a cold, methodical presentation of the facts. The centerpiece was a detailed timeline. It began on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Cross-referencing security camera footage I had requested from a neighbor's Ring doorbell, which showed Diane and Mark leaving in their SUV with suitcases at 9:14 a.m. It then tracked Diane's Instagram and Facebook posts, each one time-stamped, a digital breadcrumb trail of their journey into hedonism. 2:30 p.m., a photo of the Las Vegas sign, 7:00 p.m., the cocktail selfie, 10:00 p.m., the steak dinner. Against this timeline, I placed the known facts of my grandmother's condition. My arrival at 10:00 a.m. on Thanksgiving, the doctor's official diagnosis, and his professional opinion that her pneumonia had been developing for at least 48 to 72 hours, the note, a photograph of which was labeled Exhibit A, was the linchpin, a clear, written statement of their intent to abandon her. I included everything: Exhibit B was the 2-minute video of the cold, silent house. Exhibits C through H were the screenshots of Diane's social media posts and the fawning comments that had since been deleted. And then there was Exhibit 1, the audio file of Diane's phone call. I had known, with absolute certainty, that she would call and that the call would be incriminating. Before answering, I had activated a recording app on my phone. The transcript I had typed out was damning. Her screaming, her self-pity, her complete lack of inquiry into her grandmother's health, it painted a more vivid picture of her character than any photograph ever could. I zipped the file, password-protected it, and sent it to Ms. Alvarez with a separate email containing the password. The act felt final, like filing a motion with the court. The evidence was no longer just my own. It was now part of an official record. The next call came 2 days later, this time from a local number I didn't recognize. It was Diane and Mark's lawyer, a man named Bill Peterson, whose primary legal work, I knew, consisted of real estate closings and drawing up simple wills. He was out of his depth, and he knew it. He tried to sound intimidating, but his voice was thin with unease. Ms. Dunn? I'm representing Diane and Mark Thompson. They've been made aware of a baseless and defamatory investigation by APO. We are prepared to take legal action for slander if these accusations are not withdrawn immediately. I almost laughed. It was a pathetic, amateurish bluff. Mr. Peterson, I said, my tone glacial. Are you familiar with Title 22 of the Maple Ridge County Penal Code, specifically the statutes pertaining to felony elder neglect? Because given the evidence, which includes a signed admission of intent to leave, photographic documentation of the unsafe conditions, and a medical diagnosis directly linking my grandmother's life-threatening illness to that neglect, I believe the district attorney's office might be more interested in a criminal complaint than a civil one. Silence. I had called his bluff and raised him a felony charge. He cleared his throat. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. At worst, this is a misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment. If it were to proceed, it would be a misdemeanor, at best. A misdemeanor criminal offense is still a criminal offense. Bill, I said, using his first name to establish a dominance he couldn't challenge. It comes with a permanent record. It comes with court-mandated counseling. It comes with public humiliation. And I have all the evidence needed to ensure a conviction. That was the moment he knew he had lost. His clients weren't facing an emotional, hysterical relative. They were facing a prosecutor. He was right. Of course, a conviction would likely result in a misdemeanor charge, not a felony. Probation, a fine, community service. I didn't need them to be incarcerated. The thought of them in prison held no satisfaction for me. I didn't want to cage them. I wanted to strip them bare. I wanted to take from them the one thing they truly valued, their pristine, carefully constructed public image. I wanted them to lose the respect of their friends, the trust of their community, and the careers they used to fund their perfect, hollow life. Prison would be an ending. I wanted them to live with the consequences every single day. The story, now legitimized by an official investigation and a local news report, was picked up by a regional television station out of the nearest city. A young, ambitious reporter named Jessica Chow arrived in Maple Ridge. Her news van a jarringly modern presence on Main Street. She interviewed people on the street. She filmed the exterior of my mother's house. And she called me. She wanted an on-camera interview. I refused. But I agreed to a voice-only interview on the condition of absolute anonymity. We met in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria. I sat with my back to the camera, a black silhouette against a bright window. My voice would be electronically altered. Jessica's questions were direct. Why did you decide to go public with this? Because the public was being shown a lie. I said, my voice calm and even. They were being sold a beautiful story about a perfect family, and they deserved to know what that story was costing an innocent, vulnerable woman. Your sister, the woman at the center of this, what would you say to her now? I thought for a moment, not about Diane, but about the very definition of family, about responsibility, about the quiet, unbreakable bond I had with the woman lying upstairs in the ICU. I would say that family is not an audience for your life's performance. I said slowly. It's not a prop for your social media. It's a responsibility. It's a duty of care. Some people don't deserve the title of family. The interview aired that night on the 6 o'clock news. The clip, less than 90 seconds long, was electric. My final quote, delivered by a distorted, anonymous voice, was the soundbite that launched the story into the stratosphere. It was shared thousands of times on Facebook, then tens of thousands of times on Twitter. It was picked up by national news aggregators and morning talk shows. The name Diane Thompson became a hashtag. She was no longer just a local real estate agent in trouble. She was a national symbol for a very specific, modern kind of sin. She was the face of performative love and selfish neglect. She was the embodiment of Thanksgiving hypocrisy. I watched the clip on my phone, sitting in the quiet darkness of my grandmother's room. Her ventilator continued its soft, rhythmic sighing. I looked at her peaceful, sleeping face, and then back at the screen, where my words were sparking a national conversation. A small, faint smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of grim, absolute certainty. The case was being tried, and the verdict was coming in. Not just in a courtroom, but in every town, on every screen, across the entire country. And I was the one who had made it happen. They arrived on a Tuesday, a full day after their scheduled return from Las Vegas. I knew they were coming. I had received a clipped, formal text from my mother that morning. We are driving to the hospital. We need to see your grandmother. The use of we was telling. She had aligned herself with the guilty party. A final, predictable act of maternal loyalty to the wrong daughter. I was sitting in the chair beside Grandma Evelyn's bed when they came. The past week had wrought a quiet miracle. She was off the ventilator, breathing on her own with the help of a nasal cannula. The color had returned to her cheeks, and while she was still weak, her eyes were clear. We had spent the morning in comfortable silence, me reading a novel aloud, her occasionally drifting off to sleep. The room was no longer a battlefield of machines and alarms. It had become a quiet sanctuary of healing. The harsh fluorescent lights were dimmed. A small vase of daisies I'd bought sat on the windowsill, and the only sound was the gentle hiss of the oxygen and the turning of pages. The door swung open without a knock, crashing against the rubber stopper on the wall. The sound was a violation, a sudden, violent intrusion into the peace we had found. Diane stood in the doorway, and for a moment, I barely recognized her. The glossy, confident woman from the Instagram photos was gone, replaced by this pale, hollow-eyed stranger. Her expensive clothes were rumpled from travel. Her hair was a mess, and her face was a mask of exhaustion and raw fury. She was vibrating with a frantic, cornered energy. Behind her, my mother hovered like a ghost, her face puffy and tear-streaked. Mark was nowhere to be seen, a coward to the very end. Diane's eyes, wild and accusatory, found me. Her designer handbag, a ludicrous symbol of the world she had prioritized, slipped from her trembling fingers and fell to the linoleum floor with a dull, heavy thud. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. "You," she hissed, her voice a ragged tear in the quiet. "You did this." I placed a bookmark in my novel and set it down on the bedside table. I rose from my chair, not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate motion. I felt a strange, chilling calm settle over me. The storm had finally made landfall. "You had no right to do this to me," she finally screamed, taking a staggering step into the room. The accusation, so profoundly self-absorbed, so utterly devoid of awareness, was exactly what I had expected. It was perfect. I met her gaze, my own expression unreadable. I did not raise my voice. I did not have to. "Did you have the right to leave her alone?" I asked, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. I gave a small, deliberate nod toward the hospital bed, toward the frail woman tethered to an oxygen tank because of her choices. The simple, undeniable truth of the question seemed to enrage her further. It was a fact she couldn't spin, a reality she couldn't filter. "This isn't about her," she shrieked. A a tremor of hysteria creeping into her voice. "This is about you. You've always been jealous of me, jealous of my marriage, my children, my life. You couldn't stand that I was happy, so you concocted this entire scheme to tear me down." The accusation was so old, so tired. A refrain she had used my entire life to dismiss any opinion I had that didn't align with her own. For the first time, it had no power over me. It was the desperate, pathetic lie of a person who could not bear to look at their own reflection. My mother, standing by the door, let out a choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth. She was a spectator at the demolition of her own family, a silent, weeping accomplice. I didn't even look at her. She had forfeited her right to my attention. I took a slow step toward my sister, then another. I was closing the space between us, not with aggression, but with a crushing, absolute certainty. Her rage was a wildfire, burning hot and directionless. My resolve was a glacier, cold, silent, and unstoppable. She flinched as I drew near, as if expecting a blow. "Jealousy," I said, my voice barely a whisper, forcing her to lean in, to hear every single, devastating word. "You think this is about jealousy? Look at you, Diane. Your career is gone. Your reputation is in tatters. Your friends are deleting your photos and whispering about you at the grocery store. What part of your life right now is worth being jealous of?" I was standing directly in front of her now. I could see the frantic, terrified pulse beating in her throat. "You need to understand something," I continued, my voice devoid of heat, filled only with a profound, final clarity. "I didn't do this to you. I didn't have to. You did this to yourself. Every choice you made was a brick in the wall that is now collapsing around you. The choice to book the trip, the choice to ignore her cough, the choice to write that note and leave it on the fridge like an insult, the choice to post photo after photo of your wonderful, carefree life while she was lying here, burning with fever. Those were your choices, Diane, not mine." I held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. All I did was show people the truth, the real you, behind the filters and the hashtags. It turns out, they didn't like what they saw. But that's not my fault. It's yours. From the hospital bed, a small, weak sound cut through the tense silence. It was a voice I thought I might never hear again. "Rachel." We both turned. Grandma Evelyn's eyes were open. They were fixed on me, and in their depths, there was a clarity and a knowing that transcended her illness. A small, faint smile touched her lips. "Good girl," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of sound, but it resonated in the room like a thunderclap. It was the verdict, the final, irrefutable judgment, delivered by the only person whose opinion truly mattered. It was absolution for me, and it was condemnation for Diane. The sound that escaped my sister's throat was not human. It was a raw, wounded cry of utter despair. Her carefully constructed facade, already riddled with cracks, finally shattered into a million pieces. The rage, the defiance, the self-righteous indignation, it all dissolved, leaving behind a pathetic, sobbing woman whose world had crumbled around her. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold linoleum floor, her sobs echoing in the quiet room. Her tears were not for our grandmother. They were for herself, for the beautiful lie she had lost. I watched her for a moment, a crumpled heap of designer clothes and shattered pride. I felt nothing, no pity, no triumph, no anger, only a vast, empty calm. It was over. I turned away from her, and from my weeping mother. I walked to the window, my back to the wreckage of my family. The pale, late-afternoon light streamed in, reflecting off the sterile white walls, the polished metal of the IV stand, my own impassive face. The truth had finally come home. It hadn't arrived with shouts or threats or violence. It had come in a whisper from a hospital bed, and it had been more powerful than any weapon I could have possibly imagined. Revenge doesn't need a scream. It only needs the truth to be seen. The weeks that followed the confrontation were not filled with triumph, but with a quiet, relentless series of tasks. The storm had passed. leaving behind the slow, painstaking work of cleaning up the wreckage. While the digital world continued to buzz with the fallout of the story, my own world shrank to the four walls of my grandmother's hospital room, and then to the even smaller world of managing her long-term care. The rage that had fueled me had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold, clear embers of responsibility. The first official consequence for Diane arrived not as a dramatic explosion, but as a sterile corporate press release. I was scrolling through the local news website, checking the weather, when I saw the headline from Thompson and Grace Realty. It was a masterpiece of soulless public relations speak. The statement announced, with deep regret, that they had parted ways with Diane Thompson. It spoke of their unwavering commitment to community values and the need to maintain the highest level of public trust. It never mentioned the scandal directly. Of course, it didn't have to. The phrase they used as the official reason for her dismissal was a piece of dark, comedic genius, a fundamental misalignment with the company's core mission. Her contract had been terminated, they said, due to a sudden and irreversible loss of community goodwill. She hadn't just been fired, she had been publicly branded as a liability. The very community she had curated and performed for had turned on her so completely that her name was now professional poison. Her smiling face, the one that had once adorned billboards celebrating homes with heart, was now the unofficial mascot for a home with no heart at all. The social consequences were slower, quieter, but in a town like Maple Ridge, infinitely more brutal. I saw it for myself one afternoon when I had to run to the local pharmacy to pick up a prescription for Grandma. As I stood in line, the automatic doors slid open and Diane and Mark walked in. A sudden, palpable silence fell over the store. The cheerful muzak seemed to amplify the quiet. The woman ahead of me in line, who had been chatting animatedly on her phone, abruptly ended her call. The pharmacist, who had known Diane since she was a child, suddenly became intensely focused on counting pills, his eyes fixed on his work tray. They were ghosts. They moved through the aisles, a pocket of dead air surrounding them, their faces pale and set. People didn't glare or whisper insults. They simply looked away, their gazes sliding off them as if they were made of glass. It was a shunning so complete, so suffocatingly polite, that it was far more chilling than any open hostility. They were still here, but they were no longer a part of the town. They were a living cautionary tale, a story that parents would one day tell their children about what it means to be a bad neighbor, a bad daughter. My mother tried, of course, to stitch the family back together with the frayed threads of guilt and obligation. She called me about a week after the confrontation, her voice weary and pleading, all the fight gone out of her. "Rachel," she began, her voice cracking, "your sister, she won't leave the house. Mark's company has transferred him to a branch 2 towns over. They're thinking of moving. You've ruined them." They ruined themselves. "Mom," I said, my voice tired. I was done being angry. Now, I was just exhausted. But to make it so public, to turn the whole world against her, you've gone too far. Family shouldn't do this to family. The old argument, the appeal to a bond that they themselves had broken. I took a deep breath, the sterile smell of the hospital filling my lungs. "No, Mom," I said, my voice leaving no room for debate. I did not go too far. I filed a report with a government agency when I witnessed a crime, as is required by law. I provided evidence when asked. I told the truth when questioned. Everything that happened after that was a direct consequence of their own actions. This isn't about family drama anymore. It's about the law. She was silent for a long time. I think, in that moment, she finally understood that the daughter she thought she knew was gone for good, replaced by someone she couldn't manipulate or emotionally blackmail. "I don't know who you are anymore," she finally whispered. "I'm the same person I've always been," I replied. "You just weren't paying attention." I ended the call. Grandma Evelyn's recovery was a slow, uphill climb. The doctors said she would never be able to live independently again. The pneumonia had scarred her lungs, and the trauma of the ordeal had taken a toll on her mind. I spent days researching long-term care facilities, my legal skills repurposed for vetting contracts and patient-to-staff ratios. I finally found a place, a beautiful, sun-drenched facility called The Willows on the other side of the county. It was expensive, but the care was exceptional. It had gardens and physical therapy and a library filled with books. It was a place of peace, a place she deserved. The hospital bill arrived in a thick, intimidating envelope. The numbers were staggering, a testament to the life-saving care she had received. I looked at the final total, a figure that would have been ruinous for my mother. That same afternoon, I received an email from my firm's HR department. It was the official notification of my end-of-year bonus. For the first time in my career, the long hours, the sacrificed weekends, the relentless focus that my family had always criticized, had transformed into something profoundly meaningful. The numbers in my bonus notification were more than enough to cover the entire hospital bill. I paid it in full, online, with a few simple clicks. My work, the thing they had always dismissed as cold and unfeeling, was the very thing that allowed me to provide the care they had so carelessly withheld. It was the quietest, most personal victory of all. A month later, an email from Jessica Chow, the television reporter, appeared in my inbox. The subject line was a quick follow-up and a thank you. "I hope you're well," she wrote. "I'm not sure if you've seen the news, but your interview and the subsequent public outcry have had a real-world impact. State legislators have just introduced a new bill, nicknamed Evelyn's Law, to increase the penalties for elder neglect and to fund more frequent wellness checks for seniors living with family caregivers. Your story started a conversation that is leading to real, tangible change. I just wanted to thank you for your courage in speaking out." I stared at the email for a long time, a complex swirl of emotions churning inside me. My personal quest for justice had inadvertently become a public crusade, spawning a law that would protect countless other grandmothers. It was a consequence I had never intended, but one that felt more significant than any personal satisfaction I could ever have achieved. I typed a brief reply. "Thank you for letting me know, Jessica. But it's not my story. It's the story of a woman who was forgotten. I'm glad people are finally listening." I sent the message and closed my laptop. I could deflect the credit. I could remain anonymous. I could retreat into the shadows and let the story take on a life of its own. But as I looked out the window at the quiet, snow-covered streets of Maple Ridge, I knew the truth. My name would never be attached to it. But the story was now woven into the fabric of the town's history, a modern fable of hypocrisy and consequence. And in my heart, I knew the whole town would never forget what the Thompson family did on Thanksgiving, and they would never forget that someone, somewhere, had held them accountable. The final act of the public drama unfolded not in the glare of a Las Vegas stage, but under the humming fluorescent lights of the Maple Ridge County Courthouse a month later. It wasn't a trial. Diane and Mark, on the advice of their beleaguered lawyer, had accepted a plea bargain. The charge was criminal elder neglect, a Class A misdemeanor. In exchange for their guilty plea, they would avoid jail time, instead receiving 2 years of probation, a substantial fine, and 400 hours of mandatory community service to be served at a state-run geriatric facility. I saw the news report on the local television station before the hearing. The anchor, a man with a serious face and overly coiffed hair, announced the terms of the plea deal. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Couple in Thanksgiving abandonment, case to be sentenced." The story had a name now, a neat, digestible label for the media to use. It was no longer just my family's private tragedy. It was a piece of public property, a local legend. I chose to attend the sentencing. It was a compulsion I couldn't explain, a need to see the final page of the chapter turned with my own eyes. I slipped into the back row of the small, stuffy courtroom just as the proceedings began. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and the cheap perfume of a woman in the row ahead of me. Local news cameras were clustered in the designated media section, their red recording lights like small, unblinking eyes. Diane and Mark stood before the judge, their backs to me. They looked like strangers. The confident, carefree couple from the Vegas photos had been replaced by two pale, diminished figures, dressed in somber shades of gray and navy blue. Mark's shoulders were slumped, his hands clasped awkwardly behind his back. Diane was a statue of brittle tension, her posture rigid, her head bowed. As a condition of the plea, she was required to read a formal apology to the court. The judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, nodded for her to proceed. Diane unfolded a piece of paper with trembling hands. The rustling sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room. She began to read, her voice a reedy, cracking whisper, a ghost of its former confident tone. "Your Honor," she started, her eyes fixed on the paper as if it were a lifeline. "I stand before you today with a heart full of deep and profound regret for my actions." I listened, my own heart a cold, still stone in my chest. Every word she spoke was polished, sanitized, and utterly hollow. It was a statement crafted by a lawyer, designed to project remorse without admitting to the true depth of her monstrosity. She spoke of a severe and regrettable lapse in judgment, and of being overwhelmed by personal and professional pressures. She claimed she had failed to recognize the seriousness of her grandmother's condition. She never once said the words, "I left my sick grandmother alone to die while I went to a party." She never acknowledged the cruelty, the profound selfishness, the simple, ugly truth. It was a performance, her final, pathetic attempt to curate a narrative of victimhood. When she finished, a single, theatrical tear rolled down her cheek. She folded the paper, her knuckles white, and then, as if drawn by a magnetic force, she turned her head slightly and her eyes scanned the gallery. They swept past the reporters, the curious townspeople, and then they found me. They locked onto mine. In that moment, the courtroom, the judge, the entire world seemed to fall away. There was only the vast, silent space between me and my sister. The look in her eyes was not one of hatred or anger. It was something far more devastating. It was a look of pure, unadulterated desperation, a plea. She was a drowning woman, and in some twisted final act of familial instinct, she was looking to me for a rope. She was begging me, with her eyes, to do something, to say something, to fix it, just like the forgotten daughter had always been expected to fix the things the golden daughter broke. A year ago, that look would have shattered me. It would have triggered a lifetime of conditioned responses, the urge to soothe, to forgive, to make it all okay. But I was not that person anymore. I looked back at her, my expression uncharged, my gaze steady. The rage had burned out weeks ago, the hurt had scabbed over. All I felt now, looking at the broken woman who was my sister, was a deep and profound weariness. I was just tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the drama, tired of her. I gave her nothing, not a nod, not a flicker of sympathy. I simply held her gaze until she was the one who broke contact, turning back to the judge with a choked, shuddering sob. I didn't stay to hear the judge formally accept the plea. My part in this was over. I stood up and slipped out the heavy wooden doors into the bright, cold light of the courthouse steps. Instantly, I was surrounded. A swarm of reporters, smelling the end of the story, descended on me. A chaotic scrum of microphones, cameras, and shouted questions. "Are you the sister? Are you the one who filed the report? They're calling you the Thanksgiving Angel online. Do you have a comment on that? Are you the anonymous whistleblower who spoke to Channel 4 News?" A young woman with a microphone bearing a familiar logo asked, shoving it close to my face. "Are you the one?" The flashbulbs were blinding, the questions a disorienting cacophony. For a moment, I felt a surge of panic, but then a strange calm washed over me. I looked at the reporter, at her eager, expectant face, and the perfect words came to me. They were simple. They were true. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the noise. "I'm just the one who was home on the right day." I pushed through the throng, ignoring their follow-up questions, and walked away without looking back, leaving them with an answer they would never fully understand. That night, I let myself into my mother's house for what I knew would be the last time. I was there to collect the last of my grandmother's personal belongings before the house was put up for sale. It was silent, hollow, a museum of a life that no longer existed. In the kitchen, under the harsh glare of the overhead light, I saw it, a faint, greasy, rectangular smudge on the white door of the refrigerator, the ghost of the note. I found a sponge and a bottle of cleaning spray under the sink. Methodically, I began to scrub. I worked in small, firm circles, my knuckles rubbing against the cold metal. I scrubbed until every last trace of the adhesive, every phantom particle of that hateful message, was gone. I was erasing the last physical piece of evidence, cleansing the house of its crime. When I was finished, the surface was clean, white, and blessedly blank. It was over. Standing there, in the quiet kitchen, under a single, dim, yellow light, I whispered the words into the empty air. "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma." Later. I sat in my car in the driveway of the Willows. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Instead, I made a video call. Her face appeared on the screen, framed by soft pillows, her hair neatly brushed. She looked peaceful. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice still weak, but clear. "Hi, Grandma?" I said, my own voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "I was just at the old house. I cleaned your note off the fridge." A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. It was a smile of deep, ancient wisdom, of a woman who had seen it all and understood more than she ever let on. She looked at me through the screen, her eyes full of a love that was pure and unconditional. "You did right, honey," she said softly. "You did right." And that was it. The permission I didn't know I needed. The final, unequivocal validation from the one person whose opinion had ever truly mattered. The tears came then, hot and silent, streaming down my face in the darkness of the car. They were not tears of regret. They were not tears of sadness for the sister I had lost, or the mother I could no longer speak to. They were tears of pure, unadulterated release. A great, heavy weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted, and I cried until I had nothing left. 1 year later, the snow fell on Thanksgiving morning just as it had before, but this time, it was not a prelude to silence and dread. It was a soft, quiet blanket, muffling the world outside the large picture window of my grandmother's suite at the Willows. The room was filled with a warm, buttery light, and the air smelled of roasted garlic, sage, and the sweet, earthy aroma of baking pumpkin. There were no blaring televisions, no burnt pans on the stove, no raw turkeys sitting in a cold sink. There was only peace. Grandma Evelyn sat in a comfortable armchair by the window. A thick wool blanket spread across her lap. A year of proper care, consistent medication, and a quiet, stress-free environment had worked a profound change in her. She was still frail, her movements slow and deliberate, but the fog of trauma had lifted. Her silver hair was brushed into a soft crown, and her eyes, the same clear blue as my own, were bright with a light I thought had been extinguished forever. She was watching the snowflakes drift down, each one a tiny, perfect star, and a small, contented smile played on her lips. I was in the small, efficient kitchenette, putting the finishing touches on our meal, our feast. It was a feast for two. On the counter sat a small, perfectly roasted chicken, its skin golden and crisp. There was a dish of green beans almondine, a bowl of homemade cranberry sauce studded with orange zest, and a boat of rich, savory gravy. And in the center, in 2 prominent serving bowls, were the 2 dishes that mattered most. The first was a bowl of creamy, fluffy mashed potatoes. I had boiled the potatoes until they were tender, riced them to ensure a perfect texture, and whipped them with heated heavy cream, a generous amount of butter, and a hint of roasted garlic. They were a cloud of pure, simple comfort. The second was a pumpkin pie, cooling on a wire rack. I had roasted a sugar pumpkin the day before, scraping the sweet, vibrant flesh from its shell and pureeing it with fresh ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a whisper of clove. The crust was flaky, made with lard and butter, a recipe she had taught me when I was a girl. These were Diane's signature dishes, or rather, they were the dishes she had claimed. Every Thanksgiving of my childhood, she would present her mashed potatoes and pumpkin pie with a theatrical flourish, basking in the family's praise. She would wink and say the recipes were a secret, a piece of culinary magic only she possessed. I had discovered, years later, that her secret mashed potato recipe came from the back of a box of instant potato flakes, and her pie was made with filling from a can. It had never been about the food. It had been about the applause. It was another performance, another piece of the perfect family facade. Today, I was reclaiming them. I was making them real, infusing them with the care and authenticity they had always lacked. This meal was not a performance. It was an act of love, an act of truth. I carried the dishes to the small table I had set by the window. I used the good china I'd brought from the old house, the plates with the delicate gold rims. I lit 2 small candles, their flames dancing in the dim afternoon light. It was a scene of quiet, elegant simplicity, a scene of a life rebuilt. "It looks wonderful, dear," Grandma said, her voice soft but steady, as I helped her to the table. I carved the chicken and filled our plates. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of silverware on china and the whisper of the wind outside. The mashed potatoes were rich and decadent. The pie, when we got to it, was sublime. As I was clearing the plates, I poured us each a small glass of red wine. It was a good Cabernet, something I had been saving. I raised my glass. "To new traditions," I said. Grandma Evelyn raised hers, her hand surprisingly steady. "To the ones who stay," she replied, her eyes meeting mine over the rim of her glass. Her words were a quiet echo of the only public statement I had ever made, a validation that resonated deep in my soul. We sipped our wine, watching the world turn white. The past year had been one of endings and new beginnings. Diane and Mark had sold their big house at a loss and moved 2 states away, to a place where the name Thompson didn't carry the stench of scandal. My mother had followed them, unable to bear the shame of remaining in Maple Ridge. I hadn't spoken to any of them since the day of the sentencing. There was nothing left to say. The family I had grown up with was, for all intents and purposes, gone, and I felt nothing but relief. My phone, which I had placed face down on a side table, buzzed softly. A single, unobtrusive notification. I ignored it at first, but a moment later, my curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up. It was a news alert, a 1-year anniversary retrospective from a national online magazine. The headline was stark. "The Thanksgiving that exposed a family. How one woman's neglect became a national conversation about elder care." I scanned the article. It recounted the whole sordid affair. The Vegas trip, the anonymous forum post, the subsequent public shaming, and the passage of Evelyn's law. It mentioned that the original news clips and my anonymous, voice-altered interview had, across all platforms, just surpassed 10 million views. A footnote mentioned that the whistleblower, the so-called Thanksgiving angel, had never been publicly identified and had refused all requests for interviews. 10 million views, a number so large it was meaningless. 10 million strangers had consumed my family's tragedy as a piece of content, a brief, shocking story to be shared and then forgotten. They had turned my sister into a villain, my grandmother into a victim, and me into a nameless, faceless hero. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the quiet afternoons spent reading aloud in a hospital room, the taste of real pumpkin pie, the feeling of a frail hand squeezing your own in a moment of shared understanding. They knew the story, but they didn't know what mattered. I put the phone down. The number meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was sitting across from me, her eyes bright, her breathing easy, her presence a quiet, powerful testament to the choices I had made. The reporter for that original television piece had asked me for a final thought, a single sentence to end the interview. I had thought for a long time before answering, wanting the words to be precise, to be true. That single sentence was the only part of myself I had given to the world, the only piece of the public narrative I truly owned. It was the thesis statement for my new life. Family is not who you share blood with, my distorted voice had said from a million screens. It's who stays when everyone else leaves. I looked out the window. The snow was falling thicker now, a curtain of white erasing the world. In the darkening glass, I could see our reflection. Two women at a small, candlelit table, a scene of quiet dignity, of survival. The camera of my memory pulled back, and I saw the whole room reflected in the glass. I saw the empty chairs, the ghosts of the family that had been, the space they had left behind. But the reflection wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of peace. It was full of truth. Nothing else was needed. The revenge was complete. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me to be able to share it with all of you. I'd love to create a community right here. So please, drop a comment down below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories can travel. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing your thoughts. And of course, if you'd like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. For an extra way to show your support, please hit that hype button. It really helps the story get heard by more people who might need to hear it. Thank you again.